Welcome to Spirit, Purpose, and Energy. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host, and thank you for downloading today's episode. Today's show is brought to you by dolphinhealing.net. Anne Gordon, who runs the whalewisdomretreats.com, does a guided meditation once a month on the last weekend of each month, and it is a free, lovely healing experience. So even if you're not into the whole dolphin healing thing and you just want to get a free guided meditation from someone who's pretty magical, definitely check out dolphinhealing.net. I had a wonderful experience. Anne is lovely, and the work that she does is powerful, and I thought it was relaxing, enlightening, and inspiring. So dolphinhealing.net, make sure to check that out. Also, she has whalewisdomretreats.com, and there are 2 free gifts that she offers on whalewisdomretreats.com. I mean, of course, check out all the trips and see when you might be interested in doing a whale wisdom retreat, which is swimming with dolphins and whales in the wild and taking the lessons that they've learned from them and applying it to your life in very healing and profound ways. But she's got 2 lists. One is the lessons that she's learned over the years and gotten from the dolphins and the whales. And the other is the top 10 places in the world where you can swim with wild dolphins and whales. So if you're going to take a vacation and that's something that would be cool for you, that could be absolutely worth downloading from whalewisdomretreats.com. So today's show is mastering retrograde cycles. So let me say up front, this is not all about Mercury in retrograde. It's about retrograde in general and all the different planets that can retrograde. And what's really interesting about today's show, I've known Diane for a really long time, and she does many different things. She wears many different hats, and I do appreciate this one because, of course, I love talking about astrology. And what you'll notice in today's show is that we kind of go back and forth with different planets, and we're talking about things, and hopefully it's of interest to you. Know that I do astrology at my event. I weave in astrology. Sometimes in the January event, I actually did a whole section about astrology. And I've done a few shows here on astrology and relationships, astrology and life purpose. And I think it's really helpful to help bring more compassion and understanding. So if that's of interest to you, know that will also probably be at the next big step in September. It's not something that I am probably going to talk about a lot in terms of the marketing of the event because there's so many awesome things going on. Just know that no matter where I am and no matter what I'm presenting, if it's you guys and it's my tribe, astrology has to be part of the conversation. We're going to be doing a lot of relationship work at this event. Whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you're divorced or you're single, you're going to take a look at yourself, and we're going to use astrology as well as other psychological tools to help break that down and to understand a little bit more about you, your partner, your future partners, your past partners, and really make sense of behaviors that may have you thinking something was really wrong or off. So I use astrology in that way. So I just want to keep you aware of that we are going to do that at the next big step. The last thing I'll say about today's audio quality, I'm using a different system. It won't last forever. I just haven't been at my desk long enough to find the new one that I want to use. There's about 3 to 4 minutes of background noise. Diane had some unexpected gardener come to her house, and I could have taken this whole show and asked her to redo it, but I didn't want to waste the time that we had spent and the content that we gathered. So please forgive me for the 2 to 3 to 4 minutes that happen around minute 26 to 30 of the show that has a little bit of background noise, and hopefully you'll forgive me. You know that it is never my intent to provide not good quality, but sometimes in the podcast world you can't control it because you can't control other people's environments. All right, so please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a great show. I hope you learn a lot, and make sure to check out jjflazanes.com and get your ticket for the next big step. Welcome to Spirit, Purpose, and Energy. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host, and thank you for downloading today's episode. Today's show is brought to you by dolphinhealing.net. Anne Gordon, who runs the whalewisdomretreats.com, does a guided meditation once a month on the last weekend of each month, and it is a free, lovely healing experience. So even if you're not into the whole dolphin healing thing and you just want to get a free guided meditation from someone who's pretty magical, definitely check out dolphinhealing.net. I had a wonderful experience. Anne is lovely, and the work that she does is powerful, and I thought it was relaxing, enlightening, and inspiring. So dolphinhealing.net, make sure to check that out. Also, she has whalewisdomretreats.com, and there are 2 free gifts that she offers on whalewisdomretreats.com. I mean, of course, check out all the trips and see when you might be interested in doing a whale wisdom retreat, which is swimming with dolphins and whales in the wild and taking the lessons that they've learned from them and applying it to your life in very healing and profound ways. But she's got 2 lists. One is the lessons that she's learned over the years and gotten from the dolphins and the whales. And the other is the top 10 places in the world where you can swim with wild dolphins and whales. So if you're going to take a vacation and that's something that would be cool for you, that could be absolutely worth downloading from whalewisdomretreats.com. So today's show is mastering retrograde cycles. So let me say up front, this is not all about Mercury in retrograde. It's about retrograde in general and all the different planets that can retrograde. And what's really interesting about today's show, I've known Diane for a really long time, and she does many different things. She wears many different hats, and I do appreciate this one because, of course, I love talking about astrology. And what you'll notice in today's show is that we kind of go back and forth with different planets, and we're talking about things, and hopefully it's of interest to you. Know that I do astrology at my event. I weave in astrology. Sometimes in the January event, I actually did a whole section about astrology. And I've done a few shows here on astrology and relationships, astrology and life purpose. And I think it's really helpful to help bring more compassion and understanding. So if that's of interest to you, know that that will also probably be at the next big step in September. It's not something that I am probably going to talk about a lot in terms of the marketing of the event because there's so many awesome things going on. Just know that no matter where I am and no matter what I'm presenting, if it's you guys and it's my tribe, astrology has to be part of the conversation. We're going to be doing a lot of relationship work at this event, whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you're divorced or you're single. You're going to take a look at yourself, and we're going to use astrology as well as other psychological tools to help break that down and to understand a little bit more about you, your partner, your future partners, your past partners, and really make sense of behaviors that may have you thinking something was really wrong or off. So I use astrology in that way. So I just want to keep you aware of that we are going to do that at the next big step. The last thing I'll say about today's audio quality, I'm using a different system. It won't last forever. I just haven't been at my desk long enough to find the new one that I want to use. There's about 3 to 4 minutes of background noise. Diane had some unexpected gardener come to her house. And, I could have taken this whole show and asked her to redo it, but I didn't want to waste the time that we had spent and the content that we gathered. So please forgive me for the 2 to 3 to 4 minutes that happen around minute 26 to 30 of the show that has a little bit of background noise, and hopefully you'll forgive me. You know that it is never my intent to provide not good quality, but sometimes in the podcast world, you can't control it because you can't control other people's environments. All right, so please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a great show. I hope you learn a lot, and make sure to check out jjflazanes.com and get your ticket for the next big step. Today's show, Mastering Retrograde Cycles, is with Diane Curran. Diane does many things. Diane also consults privately for clients on using astrology to empower choice in life, business, and relationships. She wrote a monthly astrology column for several years in a major Los Angeles metaphysical magazine. She hosted, produced, and webcast one of the first weekly internet astrology programs in the 1990s, while also lecturing nationally on astrology and visionary symbolism at numerous self-development expos. Diane says about intuitive astrology that astrology offers a deeply creative language of symbols. Its strong foundations and ancient traditions of visionary art and metaphysics combine powerfully with modern tools and techniques. Her purpose is to reveal the empowering energies in each chart's unique patterns and aspects, supporting awareness and expanding options. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Hi, it is wonderful to be here, JJ.
I'm excited about our conversation we're about to have. I can't tell you how many times people ask me about retrograde. And while I do astrology, I am not an expert in retrograde or even some of the science that goes behind some of that. So I am super excited about this conversation. I know my audience will be also, especially those who listen to Spirit, Purpose, and Energy. So before we get into mastering retrograde cycles, why don't you give us a little background on your astrology background?
So I have been, I'm going to say, magnetized to astrology from the time I was a young kid. I just found that the sense of patterns that it gives us access to was a great fit for my natural curiosity about humanity and being a human being. So the idea of astrology was something that I found really satisfied my desire to understand human nature and how we relate to each other, not only personally, but in a community, in a society, in a world together. And I have found that the principles and the structures that astrology contains are amazingly effective at identifying not only what is, I'm going to say, happening now, but what you have choices to look at for yourself in the future. So I'm in for the long haul on astrology.
I love it. Me too. And so when it comes to retrograde, let's go over sort of the basic things for those people that are listening that don't understand anything about retrograde. Let's just define what a retrograde is.
Great. Well, what it is an apparent motion because we are part of a solar system. As you know, we have the sun at the center, and we are a few planets out here on Earth. And we practice what is called geocentric astrology, meaning we are making calculations about the relative positions of the planets to the Earth and to each other and to the sun. And what we're noticing, and this really started from the ancient days of astrological investigation when astronomy and astrology were the same, one and the same, they were together. Because what they were doing was they were making observations, which is really the essence of science, to identify patterns for things as simple as planting crops, looking at how you would time your cycles for, herding animals, and looking at how to not only deal with nature, but to deal with, if you will, the human cycles of emotion, thought, etc. So retrogrades are an apparent motion of a planet moving backwards in the sky as we see it here from Earth. Of course, the planets don't move backwards per se by themselves, but it's all from our Earth-centric point of view.
Okay. And so now we have this apparent moving backwards, which we know it's not, but in terms of what it does, we I think identify, lots of us, as retrogrades as being something bad, having to do with technology, having to do with misunderstandings, having to do with things breaking down, miscommunication. But I also know that that's not true for all retrogrades, and that all retrogrades are not equal. So why don't we address that?
I love that. And what you're really bringing to the surface, JJ, is something that I hear a lot as well. And people tend to identify what you described because it relates to specifically Mercury retrograde. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, and it has the fastest motion, the fastest orbit around the sun. So it has very frequent cycles. And Mercury appears from the Earth to go retrograde about 3 to 4 times a year. So we really notice it because it's considered to be the planet of communication, of day-to-day conversation, and of mechanical day-to-day activity. So when we are seeing Mercury go retrograde, we notice that there is a tendency for us to have what we might call upsets or unexpected developments in the world of communications and mechanical objects. And for many people, that's a bad thing. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't go blazing ahead as fast as I want in life because now I'm having to deal with a planetary energy pattern that isn't letting me do things the way I like to do them, which is speed ahead and not look at whatever I did in the past. But retrogrades are all about revisiting something from the past to identify what's either incomplete or unfulfilled or an opportunity to discover something that you've been looking for but haven't been able to bring to the surface yet. So it has its positive and its challenging aspects.
And how do we know is it just generally positive and challenging, or are there, I know I've read at times where one retrograde might be different than the other. And I'm guessing that has to do with where all the rest of the planets are, correct?
It does. And it also has very much to do with our own birth chart. We all are born at a certain location, at a certain time of day or night, and on a certain date. And that forms our natal chart, which is pretty much like what I want to call our energetic DNA blueprint. We carry that with us throughout life. So when planets are moving, because they don't stay where they were on the day that we were born, they move around, and they do so in a very regular motion, and then they activate or impact our natal chart. So sometimes we experience retrogrades, whether it's a Mercury retrograde, or we'll talk about some of the others in a while. They are activating us in a way that is unique to our planetary configuration. We have challenging aspects that are with us throughout life. We have easy aspects that are with us. So each retrograde impacts every individual separately and differently and uniquely. So some seem easy to us, and some seem maybe tougher to us. But sometimes we all gather together, because you know how human beings are. We all kind of say, oh my gosh, are you feeling this terrible thing? Oh yes, me too. And we try to identify with others as if they're going through the same experience. Truth be told, we're each having our own unique retrograde experience.
I tend to focus on a full moon. I'll say something's off. What's going on? Many things have to happen that I look up in the sky, and then I go, oh, okay, it's a full moon. Like, it makes sense. So I understand with the retrograde too, because there have been times where stuff hasn't worked and the computers haven't worked when they do the day before or the week after when we're not in a retrograde. So I think it's really an interesting thing to notice, but I appreciate the personalization that you just created from it, because I also have recognized the patterns of retrogrades, which seem to be in a certain element, right? So like one year they were all in water signs, and the next year they were all in a different sign, because as I track that, and not to the date, to the T, like in terms of this, but in the general essence of it, maybe it was in the water sign, because when it was in Pisces, I noticed it was also in Cancer and in Scorpio that year.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that will have a greater or lesser impact on your individual chart based on whether you've got a lot of water signs, or whether you may have a certain water sign that's particularly prominent and highly aspected by other planets in your chart in a challenging way. So it may really jump out for you individually. But I want to give us some perspective, if I may, about retrogrades, and that is this. That, again, we each have an individual natal chart, and there are people born with certain planets in retrograde, and that blueprint, if you will, is with them their whole lives. So, for example, since Mercury retrograde is the one that's most familiar to most people, there are people born with Mercury retrograde in their natal chart. Now, does that mean they're going to be challenged in communication their entire life? You know, should they just give up now and say, I'm never going to talk to anybody? Of course not. Truth be told, that Mercury retrograde in a natal chart can be a very, very powerful aspect to give you, if you will, a prompting, or in order to fulfill the energy and the possibilities of your chart. If you become present to that, you can use it very effectively to really hone the way you communicate, the way you research and review things before you make choices, and the idea that you can develop a capacity for not being thrown by individual moments in time, and develop a rather, I'm going to say, objective point of view that you get to use very powerfully, maybe more so than someone who doesn't have Mercury retrograde in their natal chart. So that's something for people to really be encouraged about, I'd say.
I agree. And thank you for that. That's how I talk about astrology just in general when it comes to people asking for advice on something good or bad. They want to like label it as good and bad. And I said, none of it's good or bad. It just is. And then when you figure out what it is, you figure out how to work with it versus be in denial about it or try to change it. And from personal experience, that's what I have had to do in order to sort of overcome certain triggers or way that I think and really integrate a healing of not having an impulse that might, let's say, have my feelings get hurt. Anyway, and it's an interesting story that I think I've shared on the show before, and I may share it again later. But Diane, what is your sign?
So I am what is called on the cusp. What that means is I was born on October 22nd, and I was born about 6 hours before midnight. So I'm at 29 degrees Libra, which means I'm very close to the very next sign, which would be Scorpio. Now, when you are 29 degrees plus a few minutes of a sign, that's being on the cusp. If you are at 0 degrees or 1 degree of the following sign, you're no longer on the cusp. You're super duper into that brand new sign. But I'm on the cusp. I get the benefits, if you will, of 2 signs, all those 29 degrees of Libra, plus I'm kind of like chomping at the bit to explore Scorpio.
Nice. Okay. And in terms of the amount of stuff that you've learned about astrology, I used astrology when I was 21 years old for the first time. I'd always been interested, but I really noticed an energetic pull of people that might not have otherwise been pulled together. And I thought it was a really interesting thing to witness and experience. And I started to dig a little deeper. And that is kind of how my astrological interests started. And I've still since then, like I couldn't talk about houses and planets and houses or anything like that. I use your birth chart to talk about energetic patterns, ways of thinking, ways of feeling, ways of processing, and and relating with others and in relationship. And that's the way I use it, because I think it gives more compassion to people. Because I also know that this is such a science, right? The astronomy and astrology thing going on there, that it's so much. I know some people have had astrological readings that are 3 hours long, and then by the end of it, they don't know what to do with that information. They've been so overwhelmed with so many things. So how do you use astrology with people to sort of give them the best advice and direction in a more usable, friendly way instead of an overwhelming way?
I think that's really a great point. And I have had clients come to me who know nothing about astrology and clients who are very expert at it. And you can still be overwhelmed, even if you're expert at something with a lot of information. So what I do is I look at, there's usually a starting point. If I'm doing a first reading for someone, one of the first things I take a look at is, what is the chart for the time that we have set to get together? And I always do a transit chart to see what is the energy right now, and is there something that would like to be brought up in the conversation? Because I'm a great believer in matching our left brain and our right brain, our intuition and our information, so that they partner together and empower the conversation. And what I find is that by really having this be an interactive conversation with clients and revisiting things that they may say, gee, I'm not sure what you meant by that, we get to really tune into the major themes that are digestible in that particular session. I like to have sessions that are about, usually first session's 90 minutes, because that gives people a little more time to relax into asking questions. And rarely have I done sessions that are 3 hours long. I did that a couple of times with a client who was very, very expert. But there's only so much information and new, I'm going to say, ideas and possibilities that our brain can, I'm going to say, access and even hold for a given moment. You need time to digest it and then come back later for a second helping. You don't want to eat all your food in a day in one sitting, right? You want to kind of give your inner intuition a chance to develop new connections between the information. So what I do is I always make sure that the communication about a chart review or interpretation is a conversation that is really as much about listening for what wants to be talked about, as well as providing information. Because I can go forever, and I know that that's really just like turning on a fire hose, and we don't need to go there.
Right. And the 3 hour readings, I was thinking about a particular client who had a reading, and maybe she had several of them, but they all were around 2 hours. So then you added it up and it was close to 5 or 6 hours of information that she was never, ever, ever, ever going to go back and utilize. And so I know that that's really, for a lot of people, they can get too overwhelmed, which is why I've never even really gone further than I kind of use it for what I use it for. It works and I'm happy. And I know I've had some great readings in the past about other like long-term things and using the different houses and stuff. And I've retained some of it, and I have some of it on audio. But even just for me, I love using astrology to help people realize that we are all very different and that we have to work with our sort of innate energies. And most people judge themselves too harshly, thinking that there's something wrong with them or why am I like this? They think it's just purely psychological. And half the time I think it's astrological. That if you don't understand your own energies, how do you know how to work with them?
Oh, I love what you're saying, JJ, because this is one of the things that I often tell people in a very basic way, which is, let me just say this, that in a particular chart, the key elements that I like to start with is what is your sun sign? What is your moon sign? And if we have the information about what time of day you were born, can we get your rising sign? Because these are essentially who you came here to be. That's your sun, what your identity is. Your moon is your inner dialogue, that inner conversation that's always going on inside of us, whether we do it verbally or emotionally. And then the rising sign is the face you show to the world. And what happens in life, we know this from many other disciplines as well, about self-development and self-healing and self-understanding, is that people come into your life usually looking for something from you. And what they see in you may be something they want to learn more about themselves, or they want to have healed in themselves, or they want to find out something they don't already know and they haven't experienced. They want to do that through you. And oftentimes, with astrology, we begin to develop an understanding of what our strengths and our natural energies are that people are seeking out, whether they're doing it consciously or not. And it gives us an opportunity to relax into that identity, if you will, and take it in a way that gives us a sense of appreciating why people may be drawn to us, whether they recognize it or not, and recognizing that we have the opportunity to create a healthy and balanced communication or even an ongoing relationship, but to do so with a certain objectivity, which gives us relief from some of the vagaries of human emotion and human rushing around that we oftentimes get involved with, right?
Absolutely. So now I'm curious, what is your rising? What is your moon?
So my moon is Scorpio. So remember I mentioned, let me say that Scorpio moon reinforces the fact that I'm on the cusp. So I've got a kind of an extra dose, kind of a double dose of Scorpio. And then my rising sign gives me a double dose of air because it's Gemini and it's early degrees of Gemini. So I'm covering 2 air signs. And in a sense, I've got a double dose of the water sign. So I've got what I think Madeline Kahn called steam heat.
You do. And what is your true node?
So my north node is in Aries in the 12th house. And I love that you're bringing up nodes because nodes are an aspect of a person's chart that I think holds the real key to their future, their past, and a direction for them to consider taking to reach their highest fulfillment during their lifetime.
I have Jan Speller's book, Astrology for the Soul, all about that North Node / True Node. And I think that book, when people ask me, I had it at my live event, and I'll be bringing it back to my live events because I incorporate astrology in all my work and definitely at the live event. And I said, if there's one book you have to buy, get this one, because I have also experienced profound insight into myself and others through looking at nodes and looking at someone's North Node.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm going to say very simply, of course, it comes from the Vedic tradition. And I think you and I both look in the world of the Western tradition. Yes, the Greco-Roman tradition.
Yes.
Okay, great. But the Vedic tradition, which is basically in the Indian tradition, predates much of what our Western astrology is, and it uses a different methodology, but it really focuses in on the North Node and the South Node. And those are typically available in even Western charts. And I find them so illuminating because the North Node is the future you're going to, and the South Node is the past you're coming from. And oftentimes, human beings, being what we're about, we tend to sort of stick with what we already know, which is our past, and see it as a strength we want to just reside in and gain comfort in and maybe even security and safety in. But where we really need to go is we need to go out there to create a brand new future. And that's our North Node. It's an area we're not yet masterful in, but if we can take that on, oh my gosh, we are going to grow as human beings and grow in our capacity to not only participate in life, but make a contribution to life. So I get obviously very excited about the nodes.
As I do. I didn't know about the South Node, so I'm learning something. Thank you. Now, I know we could talk astrology for the next 5 hours because it's something I love as well, but I want to get back to our topic of mastering the retrograde cycles.
Oh,
Before we get into the cycles, let's talk about what other planets retrograde and their effects.
Okay. In the world of astrology, the sun and the moon are considered the lights. They're not really planets, and they do not retrograde in the calculations that we make here. The Earth also doesn't retrograde because that's where we live. We're sitting on the Earth. It's right underneath our feet, and it's not going backwards. What we do have is Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and I still count Pluto, even though it was downgraded by certain astronomical bodies. But each of these planets has retrograde cycles. Now, the Mercury one, as we mentioned, is the one that happens most often and is really quick. It takes about 3 weeks to go retrograde, and there's usually a pre-retrograde and a post-retrograde that some people really get into, and it really expands it. But it's the fastest one. The slowest one is Pluto, which goes retrograde every 5 months or so for about 5 months at a time out of a given year. It's retrograde about 44% of the time. Uranus and Neptune are also retrograde fairly often at 41% of the time and 43% of the time. But these are what's called the transpersonal planets. So we have to look at those a little bit differently. The other planets that are more personal in nature that affect us individually are Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, Venus goes retrograde about 7% of the time, and it's kind of a once a year and a half in our chart. And Mars is about once every 2 years in our chart that it goes retrograde, that we see it. And Jupiter goes retrograde about 30% of the time, Saturn about 7% of the time. Now, all of that math, let's throw that out and basically say that at any given moment or day or month, we've got one or more planets in a retrograde motion, which means that its natural energy that we're used to working with is, if you will, slowed down, and it's operating in a way that really, to get the best out of it, we've got to look at that area of our life and see what needs some maybe correction put in, needs some growth, and needs some attention in order to make the most of the retrograde opportunities. So we really have retrograde energy in our natal charts pretty much all the time. It's rare to be in a phase where there are no retrograde planets and no retrograde activities in our chart. So that's why mastering retrograde activity is something that's really worth doing.
Okay, so let's get into how are we going to master retrograde cycles?
Okay, so I would say that one way to do it is to first of all recognize that it is a normal part of life. For example, we have 24 hours in a day. If we never went to sleep, we would pretty much be done awfully quick with our lives because we require sleep, which means we require resting, regenerating, recouping, refreshing, and releasing. And that is the energy of retrograde planetary motion as well. It is about giving yourself a chance to stop rushing full speed ahead and take the time to really look at what's coming up in your life that either you don't like or you weren't expecting or you didn't want or you don't know how to deal with, and see it as an opportunity for growth. And so it may come in ways that we don't identify as, oh, this is Mercury retrograde, because it isn't. Venus is all about personal love and values. Mars is about action and energy. Jupiter is about expansion. And Saturn is about, I'm going to say, maturity and contraction that goes with that. So we have an opportunity to look at those planets in our chart and see what area they may be manifesting, because they manifest either from an impulse inside ourselves, from a person or a group of people who come into our lives, or from events that come upon us in a surprising way, a way we didn't expect. So it gives us plenty of opportunities to see anything that we don't think we like from a much more, I'm going to say, neutral, objective, and I'm going to say mature point of view, rather than saying, oh, I don't like this because it's not what I expected. Retrograde can be a very productive time in a person's life. You can learn so much, you can be creative, you can even start new projects. Just don't expect them to come to fruition instantly and in the pace at which you're used to operating. You may have to go a little slower and double check things and triple check things and kind of develop a way of experiencing, I'm going to say, slowness that can actually be something you begin to enjoy, so you can experience depth and growth.
Okay, so I'm going to see if this resonates, and if I take the sound bites from this and say, okay, on an action level, if you're in a retrograde cycle, number one, slow down. Yes.
Yes.
Number two, notice what might feel, or I mean, you can obviously investigate a little bit deeper with your astrological chart as well as what's going on in the world and in the sky. But generally, you can look at anything that seems a bit challenging and look at it differently, and maybe use it as a way to, as a purification of something to let go of, or something to work differently with. Yes? No?
Yes. And I would say release is a really good word that comes to mind with what you were just saying there. The idea that there's something that may be stuck in your life or in your pattern of behavior that really, it would benefit you to let go of it and make room for something new to come in.
So a retrograde could be looked at then like therapy, in that you're being mirrored certain things in your life that aren't working.
Perfect. I love that, because that is a very empowering way to handle anything that's coming your way that you're not really at ease with, or maybe don't know quite what the answer is. Sometimes if you don't have the answer, the most powerful place you can be is to be in the unknown and allow new information to gradually come to your attention because you're paying attention, and then, solution or a new idea can really take seed inside you and start to grow.
Okay, I like that, because I know there's a bad rap for retrograde, and I participate in that sometimes. I don't try, but when like the first thing happens, I surrender in a way and say, well, I mean, and the good news is that if it's a computer thing or a miscommunication, I just let it go and don't try to fix it or force it, because I just accept and surrender to that this isn't going to work right now. So I think I utilize it properly in that way, but I think there's also, we all kind of get in a tizzy, if you will, thinking that all kinds of bad things are going to happen. And of course, when you're in that frequency, you're going to look for it and you're going to create more of it. So,
oh yeah. and a perfect example of what you're describing, again, we're still kind of in the world of maybe Mercury retrograde here, but sometimes what happens is people have mechanical issues that crop up, and then they have to either go and get some customer service help or get online with a tech support call, or they have to they feel like they need to confront the source of that issue. And then you get into a communication that's really unpleasant and unworkable, not only for you, but for the other person you're speaking with. Because guess what? They're just trying to do their job. And what we find is that it gives us a chance to notice how we're dealing with communications with other people when it is not going the way we want it to do. And that can be incredibly illuminating, because what you have an opportunity to do is to get on the same side of the table with that other person and have the two of you work together to find a solution. And sometimes you're the one who's got to take the lead, even if you're the one who feels like, hey, this happened to me. Why do I have to be the more responsible one? Well, here's your opportunity to gain that much power.
I love it. That's great. That's good advice. So now I heard you go over the Venus and the Mars and the Jupiter and the Saturn and what all of those things represent. And there's just so much in astrology. And I know today's show is only supposed to be mastering a retrograde cycle. And if you hear something that we're talking about today that you want us to go a little deeper in, please make sure to be in touch. You know where to find me. jjflazanes.com. Come over to Instagram, Facebook. I get messages from all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. So let me know if there's something that you want us to talk more about on the show in terms of astrology, because I don't want to overwhelm you. I'm so afraid of that because it's very easy to do. So when it comes to mastering retrograde cycles, is there anything else, Diane, that you think would be of value to the listeners and to the community in terms of do's and don'ts? Definitely do this and definitely don't do this.
Yes, I would say that what would be really helpful is if you have an opportunity to get your chart so you can see where that particular retrograde is impacting you, great. But what that will allow you to also do is to begin to research, okay, so when does the cycle for this retrograde begin and when does it end? So it gives you a framework, and you can have now a context for, oh, okay, so this Mercury retrograde is only going to be 3.5 weeks long. So let me keep that in mind, and it will keep you more even-keeled and your emotions on an even space where you can say, oh yeah, this is my opportunity to use this effectively. And then you might actually start to even look forward to them, because you might find yourself discovering new I'm going to say, skills that you have or have developed. So if you know the beginning and the end dates, you begin to really see how you respond to that cycle, and you can make the most of it. And then you're ready for the next level, because there's another level underneath the actual dates of the retrograde, which is before it goes retrograde and after it goes retrograde. But we're not going to talk about that right now. That's in the realm of TMI for today.
Okay, great. Diane, how do you work with people? How can they get in touch with you? What can you offer them in terms of this astrological conversation?
Well, there is a very, I'm going to say, very succinct and efficient website that people can reach me at. It's called zodiacway.com. So it's ZODIACWAY.com. And I do, for people, after we have an initial quick conversation, they'll let me know their phone number. We'll chat, make sure that they feel like I'm a good fit for them. We can schedule a private consultation. So they can find out a little bit about me by going to that site. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, so they can find me, Diane A. Curran, and send me a message and let me know if they've got any questions. What I always do, by the way, on my personal page on Facebook is I always alert people when Mercury retrograde is coming, so they can have those dates and plan on it. So I like to do that little service for everybody, and I notice people are always very interested to know that information.
Excellent. Okay, so basically you'll do a mini free 15-minute consult to see if you're a fit for them.
Yeah.
And then you'll do some kind of private consultation around their chart.
Absolutely.
Okay. Excellent. Zodiacway.com. Well, Diane, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And I was excited about this topic because, of course, like I said, I'm super excited about everything astrology without letting it get too overwhelming. So we'll definitely have to have you back in the future for all the other topics now that have come to my mind that we can talk about. And I just appreciate that you've taken the time today, and hopefully everyone will check out Zodiac Way. And again, thanks for being here, Diane.
Oh, JJ, this was such a pleasure. I got to say, your enthusiasm, your mindset is so, I'm going to say, appropriate for astrology, because it's about investigation, it's about observation, it's about discovery, and that is really the tool it can be. It's really a language for discovery and communication, and it's been my honor and pleasure to have a conversation like this with you. Thank you so much.